Okay, so Clive, we're going to start with you because you have probably one of the hottest topics of the week. And I saw some people in the comments saying they were waiting for this. People have been waiting very patiently for the past couple of years, and that is Siboney. So FINSAC has finally sold its shares in Siboney, and give us, the update. What's going on? What are the implications? You're muted.
Okay, yes. Sorry about that. Thanks again for having me. And it's good to be on the program again. This is an interesting topic. Yes, Siboney. There are two companies listed on the stock exchange as in the leisure tourism industry, and that is Cove and Siboney. And interestingly, I'm looking at their last published financials up to August last year, and the auditors made a statement about it being a going concern. They are quite technical, right? As well as, there are regulatory and accounting rules and principles that they need to apply when they're doing these financials. And my thought was that it was not a growing entity in the sense that it was not producing any goods or services. It was not producing value, right? It was simply an eggshell entity that exists. And it really is. But of course, have some value. And this is why they remain listed on the stock exchange. In fact, it was in 2018 that they sold their last piece of non-performing asset. That is an asset that simply sat down a piece of property. And it had intrinsic value, it being a piece of prime property. And they sold that in 2018. I'm looking at this announcement, and they distributed that, a capital distribution of 34 cents per stock unit. In February 2018, that's the last significant value that the shareholders received from this company. Since then, nothing at all. And it was just not generating. Anyway, my thought was that it should have been delisted long time ago. Well, they had, it has some value, and we now see that value being realized. It's strange though, because I asked myself a few questions. What is the benefit of them, someone acquiring this company? I can tell you this, that perhaps about 15, 16 years ago, JMMB Securities Limited, the equity investment arm of JMMB Investments, our leadership then, Mr. Leo Williams, we were seeking some buyers. Well, we were trying to arrange that type of arrangement for someone to buy this company, as a holding company for perhaps other entities. Yeah? There's a benefit to being listed on the stock exchange, as your previous guest noted. First and foremost, capital, we understand that. But also exposure, he spoke to that also. But it also provides you some opportunity, and there's some tax benefits also in terms of dividend payment, in terms of movement of shares. There are certain tax that you're exempt from by being a public listed entity. But I think the biggest opportunity then is the potential raising of capital, but also it exposes you in a regulatory and transparent manner to perhaps structure deals outside of the jurisdiction of Jamaica. For example, a public listed entity must have full disclosure in every respect. That is important to any company that may want to do business, whether they want to buy products from you, sell your products, or perhaps have an amalgamation or some type of strategic partnership. So that is the benefit that comes with a public listed entity. And I suppose that this is the main value or main reason for this entity to buy Siboney. The big question I ask though, how is value going to be transferred? The minority shareholders, the significant shareholder, IEC Energy Company Limited, they have paid there might have been some consideration to acquire this Siboney. More than likely $1, the nominal value, because it has negative equity value, which means that its assets outweighs its obligations outweighs assets, negative value. No PE, meaning that we can't give a number, for a relative valuation measurement, even compare it to a peer or any other company. So they might have paid some nominal consideration, which is legal and necessary to do, $1. But the minority shareholders, what value do they bring? How do they acquire value in this company? We know that the shares have been trading over the last several time period. And we know that it is highly speculative because, as I said, there's no business process going on to generate revenue, to create value. Right? So it was highly speculative. People were buying on this basis that they may sell. And every now and then we saw the stock price peak up when the FINSAC committee or board made some arrangement, made some announcement. Yeah.
So whenever there was a rumor that there's a buyer, then you see the price jumped up,
But how will value be transferred? How do the minority shareholders get value and get worth? Well, I think it's going to be a holding company. They can now transfer a private asset by some legal means under the holding of this company. They could perhaps also raise additional capital. That is, they could have a rights issue or raise some capital under this listed entity and get all the necessary tax benefits that may come from it. But the minority shareholders, how do the question is, if I inject capital into a company by paying a value for this company, then it means that they are free riders, who are just going to automatically get some value from this, So I don't know how that will be managed, especially if they are already, look at MFS Capital, SSL Venture Capital, and now MFS Capital. Yeah, do you absorb your private companies under this, which means that the minority shareholders automatically get some value? It means that you are splitting and cutting the value of your private entities. Right? Or I think the perhaps next best route is to raise fresh new capital under the Ciboney Group, so everyone now can partake equally as a legitimate paid up shareholder. But as it is not, right? But there's also another question. We don't know. The stock price is moving and has moved on a speculative basis. What we well, surely we're paying something for nothing because the net asset is negative, right? We don't yet know also how it will be structured, how it will be organized. We don't know what type of assets they'll acquire under this holding company, or what value of any asset they'll transfer under this holding company. So as it is now, it is still very much speculative. We can say that in the future, some value will come to the company. Yes, we know that, right? But we don't know what that value is. So as it is still, yeah.
Let's just look at the stock price jump today, Clive. As you talk about the stock price, so it was at 65 cents and it's jumped to 155 and it's up 32% today alone. And last year before, this was pennies.
2021, yes.
Yeah, the stock was pennies when the speculation was in full swing. So people would have made multiples upon multiples if they bought at that point and held and now are, offloading and selling now.
Yes, and interestingly, what I noticed today, 2-point-something million units traded. I was looking, and you can also scan through the volume over the last year, and just a few times, all around 1 million units traded. Perhaps 4 times it exceeded 1 million. So I think the market, up to last year, a year ago, 12 months ago, was a little bit wary. Now that news has come in, you can look at the volume traded. There has been a spike culminating in the highest volume traded today when compared to the last 12 months. But so when we look at, in 2021, there's also a huge spike on the basis that someone should have acquired the company. And in fact, it traded over $2. But then in 2021, I'm looking at some figures here. In 2021,
I don't have data.
Yes, okay, fine. Yes, up to February 2021, traded as high as $2.13, right? And in that particular period, the stock had gained in excess. 2021 compared to 2022 had gained in excess of 800% in value, in stock price value. Right? So, and of course, it retreated right back to about 30-something cents, and now it has gone up again. There's more firmer, more fundamental news. Yes, it has been taken over, but we're still in the dark as to what the future structure of this company will be, what type of capital will be injected, what type of assets, what will the business line be. There are quite a few unknowns as of now, but I think the market is quite okay. The speculative market, that is, they're quite okay with that. They'll deal with that down the road when it comes.
Yeah, so Philip has a question. Philip just wants some clarity. Are you positing that they may have paid $1 total or $1 per share?
Well, it's negative asset, negative capital. I'm not saying that, no. By accounting, by legal rule, I believe some nominal value must pass, a minimum $1. So I'm saying that the lowest they may have passed, transacted to execute this transaction is $1. But more than likely, it has greater value. How do we measure that value? I'm speculating here, right? I'm just giving scenarios. What is the worth of it? It's a public listed entity. If you want to list a new company on the stock exchange, what is the cost of listing that new entity? So you can perhaps compare it to that. You have JC, regulator fees, you have accounting fees, you have lawyer fees, legal fees, and all these. If these amount to probably 10, 15, 20 million, then the value of this transfer could be around that. You see? So there's really a very wide range as at now. Right? So even though it has a negative equity, I don't think the buyer is concerned about that. I think what is of value to them is that this is a public listed entity. And the prospective value to them is, one, the potential ability to transfer earnings, that is through dividend payment at reduced rate, tax rate, I should say. Some tax rate may not apply, will not apply to dividend payment. The ability to move shares, again, with exempt from certain type of taxes, the ability to raise additional capital as a public entity, right? And also, as I say, over time, as a public listed and the proper disclosure and transparency requirement, they have exposure to all other entities throughout the world that they may or could do business with, right? So that is of significant value. So I suspect that this would be of the greater value to these buyers. And that could cost, what could it cost? Anything, it could be in the millions of dollars. But I'm just saying that legally, $1, there must be a consideration, and the minimum consideration typically is $1. But more than likely...
Remember, Phil, just for clarity, remember we did a story on Jamalco recently, where the government sold its stake in Jamalco for $1. So yeah, there's precedent for stuff like that happening when a company has, as Clive mentioned, negative assets. So we have a few questions and comments on this topic. Leon says, remember, it may seem like a shell. However, the company has brand equity and business legacy. Roswell says, the shareholders of Siboney must feel a sense of joy and relief. You put that like if you sound like you are one of the shareholders of Ciboney, Roswell. Is you saying, it sounds like it. And then Roswell again, I was wondering, how is it that Ciboney is trading on the JSE with no intrinsic value? Well, Clive, you explained that. Yes. And then Strong Link saying, raise capital to do what? I think you kind of started answering that as well. Then Rich is saying the history of this kind of transaction is that there is very likely to be an attempt to raise capital from the market, and that will then be used to create value.
Yes. No, exactly. So as I say, raise capital to do what? We don't know as yet. If we can go back to some research on IEC Energy Company Limited, what are the assets they own? What type of business lines are they engaged in? We can perhaps get some idea as to what Siboney may be registered as. Certainly not as a leisure and tourism company, but as something else. That would have to be adjusted, right? So we can only guess and spell. But what is the value of this asset? We have no clue right now. So it is still highly speculative. The standard portfolio recommendation would not advise anyone to hold this in their portfolio. As at now, it is very, very highly speculative. We can only guess. But one thing we believe, though, rationally, is that there is some value coming. But how much is it? What is it? We don't know.
Yeah, this is one for the risk takers and the speculators. Exactly. Yes. If you want to set some money aside to gamble upon this one, then there you go and see if it pays off. Well, that's up to you, right? Depends on your risk tolerance, right, Clive?
Exactly. Yes, so. Yeah, that is so.
All right. Do I see any more comments on this one? Just one, I think. Where is that comment? Strong Link says dividends, but then there's no distributable profit, is there?
No, there's
at least not now.
No assets at all. Absolutely none. The last piece of asset that was 2018, that piece of land that they sold, and they distributed that, the value of that. They sold it and distributed that already. So there has been no payment coming from them since then.
And then Strong Link wants to know, JSE rules don't require more disclosure, I suppose from the buyer, he means?
That's a very, that's an interesting question. I would need to investigate that. I doubt it, because that's a very good question. And that is a serious thing that perhaps the market should take up. Maybe brokers, maybe investing public should take up, should there be more disclosure? Who are you? That's a very good question that I cannot answer, but it is something that should be thought of and should be considered.